Chapter 2. The Shapers. By the time Katie Diaz entered her early teenage years, surfing had stopped feeling like a pastime and started becoming the structure around which much of her life rotated. The change happened gradually enough that nobody inside the family announced it outright. There was no single contest victory or dramatic realization. Instead, the seriousness accumulated quietly through routine, through the fact that she was waking earlier without being asked, spending longer sessions in the water, paying closer attention to tide charts and swell forecasts and wind readings, staring out windows at school toward the coast when offshore winds picked up during morning classes. Surfing was becoming less about excitement and more about discipline. That transition mattered because La Libertad was not an easy place to learn casually. The coastline could look calm from shore, especially to visitors arriving from San Salvador for a weekend near the water, but the Pacific along El Salvador's volcanic coast demanded respect of a specific and physical kind. Reef breaks like Punta Roca punished hesitation and exposed flaws with mechanical indifference. A surfer who positioned poorly or committed too late could find themselves driven directly onto volcanic rock that didn't care how hard they'd worked to get there. Katie loved waves that intimidated people. Adrian Wigston. One of the most important figures in Katie's development during these years was Adrian Wigston, known throughout the surf community as Pelo de Tusa, a nickname that had attached itself to him years earlier and stuck in the way nicknames do in small communities, becoming more real than the name on his passport. Adrian had founded Sunzal Surf Company in 2005, building it into something more than a business, a center for the development of Salvadoran surfing, a place where technical knowledge accumulated and was passed forward to younger athletes who wouldn't otherwise have access to it. He was not a coach in the formal sense, not credentialed by international bodies or employed by a national federation. He was something more specific, a waterman who had spent decades developing an intimate knowledge of this coastline, who cared about the sport seriously enough to share what he knew, and who had the patience to work with young athletes through the frustrating plateau periods that competitive development always involves. He recognized Katie's potential early, though not in the exaggerated way sports stories are often told afterward, with hindsight making the recognition seem sharper and more certain than it actually was. What stood out was not some obvious future legend quality. It was her consistency, her willingness to absorb coaching, and the fact that she listened, actually listened, which is less common than it sounds among teenagers who already believe they know more than their coaches. Adrian focused heavily on technical refinement. He worked with Katie on positioning, speed generation, wave selection, reading sections earlier, the detailed, unglamorous work of competitive development that happens mostly out of frame, in ordinary conditions, far from the moments that get photographed. Sometimes those sessions frustrated her badly, especially during adolescence, when physical growth temporarily disrupted the coordination and timing she'd spent years building. One afternoon at El Sunzal, after struggling repeatedly to land aerial maneuvers cleanly, she paddled invisibly irritated and sat near the rocks, scraping old wax from her board while other surfers remained in the water. Adrian sat beside her without speaking for a few minutes. "You know what's good about today?" "What?" "You're angry because you know you can do it." Katie shook her head. "That doesn't help much right now." "It helps more than not caring." What coaches appreciated most about her was not simply ambition. Many young surfers dreamed about professional careers or international travel. Katie's difference was her tolerance for repetition. She didn't seem to get bored working on fundamentals. She could spend hours on small adjustments that casual spectators would never notice. The precise angle of a bottom turn, the timing of a weight shift, the specific sequence of movements that separates a technically correct maneuver from one that merely looks similar from shore. The ocean rewards that kind of patience eventually, but eventually requires enormous faith during the intervening period, and not everyone has it. She did. Bomba's lesson. Her brother Bomba had years of competitive experience throughout Central America by then, and he understood the difference between athletic ability and competitive mentality from having watched plenty of talented surfers fail to develop because they couldn't manage the emotional requirements of high-stakes performance. Talent alone rarely carries surfers very far. The ocean exposes insecurity quickly, with complete neutrality, without cruelty, but also without mercy. After one local competition near El Sunzal, where she'd surfed below what she knew she was capable of, Katie spent most of the drive home staring silently out the car window while the other surfers joked around behind her. Bamba finally glanced over. "What's bothering you?" "I kept looking at the judges." He nodded slightly. "Then stop surfing the judges and surf the wave." She didn't respond immediately, but she heard it. That advice stayed with her through years of competition that followed, functioning not as a motivational slogan, but as a technical correction, a reminder that attention has a finite supply and where you direct it determines what you see. The lineup. The surf community along El Salvador's coast during the 2000s remained relatively small, more interconnected than competitive in the way that small communities tend to be. Most serious surfers knew each other by name. Equipment circulated between families and friends because boards were expensive and difficult to replace. Local contests often mixed surfers from very different circumstances: children from fishing families who learned on borrowed gear, kids from San Salvador whose parents had money enough for quality boards and lessons, foreigners who'd relocated to the coast, travelers passing through Central America chasing swells between other destinations. The ocean flattened certain social divisions while reinforcing others. In the lineup, what mattered was ability and respect. Who could read waves, who paddled for the right ones, who behaved correctly in crowded conditions, who took their turn without taking more than their share. On shore, the same inequalities that shaped Salvadoran life generally still applied. Who had equipment, who had money for travel, who had contacts abroad that might open doors. Katie developed a reputation during these years for being intensely competitive without becoming performative about it. She disliked losing. She rarely blamed judges or circumstances. Instead, she tended to replay mistakes privately and return to training quickly afterward. One local surfer remembered watching her after a disappointing heat at La Bocana. While other competitors relaxed near the beach afterward, Katie paddled back into the lineup alone and spent nearly an hour practicing turns on smaller inside sections. "She treated every bad result like homework," he said later.